everybody. Welcome to the Winner's Circle. We are so excited to have you. My name is Clara Smyth, and today I'll be talking about competitive marketing in the wild, how to find your tone and nail your next competitive campaign. I just want to thank you for joining also. We are so excited about this inaugural event, and it couldn't have been successful or happen without your support. So way to invest in yourself and your future and have your tomorrow self thank your today self. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit about me. I'm a senior PMM focused on compete at Slack. I've come from 10 years of competitive intelligence and marketing backgrounds at companies like ADP, iCIMS, NetSuite, Oracle, and now at Salesforce after they bought Slack. So really excited to pay it forward in the industry today and hope you can learn a couple of things from today. And I want to also make sure that you join us and invite you to join us in our live roundtable after the fact. So today we're going to talk about why competitive marketing, finding your competitive tone, examples in the wild, right? We're going to walk through real live competitive examples of what worked, what maybe didn't work, some areas for you to consider, and then most importantly, how to nail your next competitive campaign. And stick around to the end because we have some fun additional resources as well. So let's jump in. So why competitive marketing? Competitive marketing is a thing that a lot of people attempt, that a lot of PMMs, demand generation specialists, content experts try to do well. But in reality, it is a very difficult thing to nail perfectly. And that's why I like to look at common examples that we see throughout the industry and also have a dedicated session in the Winner's Circle specifically around how to nail competitive marketing. So when we talk about why competitive marketing, it's because you can't afford to not clearly articulate your value prop in highly saturated markets. We are seeing two kind of juxtapositions happen within the market today. We're seeing macroeconomic conditions have people be a little bit tighter with their budgets and require more evaluation thoroughness and specificity in that regard. And then on the other side, you have a lot of funding, a lot of innovation, a lot of entrance and brand new providers in the market that are kind of causing a lot of pressure for these two poles to come together. So where does that fit in for you and your company? It creates a huge opportunity for you to differentiate and be remembered. So when we talk about competitive marketing, it really comes back to going well beyond brand, well beyond PR or enterprise or demand generation efforts. It can look like a lot of things. It can look like maybe naming a competitor in an external asset, maybe doing a specific teardown analysis on a dedicated microsite, right? It could be a full-fledged takeaway or competitive pricing campaign. It can also include, dedicated competitive case studies, rip and replaces of competitors that or customers that left certain competitors and came to your company as a customer. Or it could really be any external mention of your competitors. And it's really important that you have this conversation internally, which leads us to our second slide, which is what is our upside risk and downside risk of doing it or not doing it, right? If you do it early and often, you're often seen as category creators and owners. You're setting the tone in your industry and you're creating a narrative around the why for your product for customers to remember. Now, if you don't do it or you do it later, or you're waiting for other leaders in your industry to do it before you, you could be on the back foot. But this is also an opportunity to take a reactive stance or need to kind of reset the tone for the industry. So either way, either bucket that you're in, there's a huge opportunity to do it. It just really depends on your bandwidth, your company priority, and really how punchy you want to be against the competitors. So I encourage you to have this conversation internally, like I mentioned, and also consider the upside risk and the downside risks if you do or don't do competitive campaigns. Which leads us to a super, super critical area that a lot of people put some intentional thought into, which is finding your competitive tone. Now, I like to use a couple of Slack emojis, obviously being from Slack, using it each and every day. So I hope you can enjoy some of the humor around it. But what I see is a spectrum of, on the left-hand side, you're naming and maybe even shaming competitors very brashly. You're using it with a lot of fire. You're bringing the heat each and every day. And then there's those in the middle who are maybe a little bit more neutral, or all the way on the right-hand side, which is you're anonymizing any competitor mention. You're talking about them as maybe full suite providers or a laggard technology or old innovation, et cetera, et cetera. Or you're just having the swag where you don't even mention them at all, like this cool cat over here. And where I've seen this play out, if you're looking for examples within your own industry, is I see certain major companies specifically naming competitors in fiscal earnings calls, right? They talk about takeaways from that competitor or why they left that competitor. They talk about competitive displacements in case studies or targeted microsites. So these are examples on if you want to go to that side of the spectrum, go for it. And this is what it looks like in action. And then on the right-hand side, we're really talking about this open space versus competitors, right? We're talking about differentiation baked into your value proposition already. So this often happens when you're leading in the industry where you don't need to give a lot of space to competitors because you are that leader. I think a lot of the times, like the seconds and the thirds of industry often see themselves on the left-hand side of the spectrum. And leaders in the industry, or when you don't have much competition, you can really get away with the ones on the right-hand side. And you can do a little bit of each, right? So please feel free to test around, see what works, interview your customers, see what works best for your market, your industry, and your tone. So some key aspects to consider when you're building and finding out your competitive tone is know your roots, right? Go back to how your company was formed. What is the general brand and approach to value creation? What is that unique thing that you offer to customers that nobody else can? And how have you done this traditionally, right? Companies can change their roots, but I think it's important to know what the founder's vision was specifically around speaking to competitors. Think about your competitive campaign and how long this could last. Really effective competitive campaigns have lasted decades, and I'll be going through some examples of that because there's some downstream repercussions, positive or negative, right, that can come from your competitive campaign. So remember, when you put yourself out there, this is something that can be screenshotted by companies, by customers, by analysts, by prospects. And then also you have really cool technology like the Wayback Machine where you can look at really old competitive marketing campaigns. So just be thoughtful about how long this could last and the longevity around your competitive campaign. And then think about, are you taking this from a proactive stance, a reactive stance, and who is this really for? Is this to amp up your brand in the market? Is this to have analysts notice you or to take away customers or to bring about more revenue? Is it really to create better assets and resources for your internal sellers to be able to take that message to market quicker? Really think about who is this for, and that will really help you determine the purpose and intention of the campaign. And then I always like to say, get buy-in early, right? If you're running a competitive campaign, go up the ladder, right? Make sure that marketing leadership's aware of this, product leadership is aware of this, and most importantly, sales leadership is aware of this because they're the front lines in the trenches that are going to have to respond to this campaign when customers bring it up. So talk to your customers, do your focus groups, bring this up on sales calls, and get feedback and reiterate from there. So now I'm going to jump into the meat and potatoes of some really exciting examples in the wild and how others have done it, and some thoughts and areas for you to consider as you build out your competitive tone and your future competitive campaigns. So this is an example of a not milk alternative, right? What they've done is they've taken the branding of milk, they've gone into the dairy aisle, and I can see this is specifically from Sprouts being from Colorado, and they are specifically doing the opposite. So they're understanding what people are experiencing and what they know milk for, and they're saying this is the exact opposite. And you can understand how easily people can wrap their head around this messaging campaign. And I have to give a huge shout out to Andy McConnor-Bicknell, who has been really going across everywhere and finding a lot of competitive campaigns in the wild. And so if you're interested in checking out more, check out competitivesnacks.com. Have to give him that credit. And curious around any competitive campaigns that you might see in the wild and sharing that back with him and us in the future. So long story short, what this does really well is it creates a new category from an existing category. And then we move to the IBM welcome letter from Apple. So this was from the 80s. And what you can see here is that they're welcoming IBM into the category. Why? Because it's important to serve customers and it's an important validation of that category. So they're really taking a proactive leadership tone where they're not only mentioning competitors, but being very welcoming and validating in terms of what this means and adding them to the challenge of delivering that best-in-class experience to customers. So especially if you're number one, you can do this for number twos and threes that follow, Or if you're number two, you can also speak to number one and say what they are doing or not doing well. So this was a very classic example published in the New York Times, and they're welcoming them to the task. So something to consider, especially if you're a category creator or following up to leaders in the category. And then we have the infamous and really, really funny I'm a Mac and I'm a PC type humorous example, right? This is now on YouTube for anybody to see if you're not familiar with it. But basically, I think what it does well is it creates that juxtaposition again of who do you want to be friends with? Right? Who do you want to be connected with? And at the end of the day, here, what you find is that you are more gravitated to the casual, cool Mac person here who speaks to the differentiation there. And I think that this shows, in a long stream type of format, right, in a dedicated commercial, how you can be different than a competitor and how you can put them in a box and brand them specifically based on the issues and feedback from those end users. And then we switched to Slack, my company. A couple of years ago, Slack replaced email with this major kind of go-to-market message. And what they've done here is instead of naming a specific competitor, they're saying, let's go after this open white space. Let's go after what everybody is very familiar with, what everybody uses every single day, which is email. And the pains of email, the experiences of email, and it's just a very solid grounding space to connect with anybody within the industry who is on email across all industries. So as you can see, it's opening, it has a very clear CTA, and the end users feels really engaged and connected to the pains of email inside their company. And then lastly, with Airbnb here, they are very straightforward. They don't necessarily mention a competitor, but they mention the category of hotels, right? Don't just go there. Don't just check in and check out by a certain date. Live there, experience this view from Paris. And I think this is a really punchy way of attacking the category, attacking the others, and really explaining the value point of having that full immersive experience. So this is something that I love to see that's on the other side of the spectrum, where they're not naming a competitor, but they're really talking about the different experiences that the end user might go through when they go on vacation, for example. So now I want to take a couple minutes and talk about the epic comparison site. So I've seen this work really well. I've seen this be some epic fails as well, where customers, will be asking, can I have a comparison chart of you versus your competitors? And the classic, junior PMM basic marketer will say, yeah, we'll create that with some features on the left-hand side and, some, inputs, maybe check boxes or Harvey balls or, X marks in each of the columns. But I wanted to kind of flip it on its head and show a whole new approach to a comparison site. This was done by GitLab, and GitLab, what they really started with was, instead of a feature, right, or criteria, they started with a use case, right? And they started specifically with, what is the customer trying to accomplish? And what they've done here in a brash way is introduce the confusion of the market. And I think it works well for them, where instead of saying, go with a whole bunch of other tools, why don't you just pick GitLab across the board? And what they've accomplished here is giving credibility to other competitors in the market, but they also introduce them. So that's the risk that you play here. And what I love here is it's really just customer centric. It's focused on what the customer is trying to accomplish. And it's creating, like I mentioned before, the confusion of going through multiple tools and what your tech stack would look like after the fact. So this is a fantastic way to unite with the customer, to give them something to level up beyond the classic check marks, X mark matrix that they can debunk if they're closer to the competitor than they are to you. Here is a quick Giphy of a technology company. Everybody has probably heard of Oracle. And what they've done is they've packaged some of the best competitive content that I've seen into one page. So I'm going to walk you through it. So this is a dedicated microsite for ERP, right? Enterprise Resource Planning. And they created this against SAP. So they go first into their comparison charts that they have based on why this matters, not necessarily a feature or function. Then they talk about the ROI. They talk about the migration process. They talk about customer feedback, and then they go deep into which customers has chosen them in relation to SAP, in addition to analyst coverage. And And then at the end, they say, hey, if you're looking at other providers, we have this for other providers as well. I think this is like a really good example of an enterprise grade marketing machine pushing out as much competitive content as possible to enable the customer to be able to take steps out of their evaluation process, right? Especially if they're very pro Oracle. I think this could negatively play out messy if the customer might debunk some of this or have positive experiences with SAP. But I do think in this reality, they are creating tools for the customer to get ahead and cut steps out of their evaluation process. So something to think about. I think they've nailed a lot of the certain areas, but it might not be for everybody or every industry. So in close, I wanted to give you some final things to think about when you're talking about nailing your next competitive marketing campaign. So when you are thinking about creating a competitive campaign, it is so critical to align with demand gen marketing. If you're looking to create a campaign that goes net new out to the market, they are really the experts of measurement on the right channels, on how to create assets and push those out, and then timelines around that. So don't feel like you have to take on the brunt of an end-to-end marketing campaign. Really align with them and use their expertise and learn from them as well, because they know their channels best. Think about, is it a single asset or integrated funnel approach? So are you looking to push out maybe a one sheet comparison chart around a certain competitor, or are you thinking about really moving the prospect through the funnel with multiple assets? Think through, is this top of the funnel, right, tofu, or bottom of the funnel, closing content? And think about what's next for this prospect. So after they would receive that comparison sheet or that competitive case study or that technical teardown, what's next? And can they take that internally to their board of directors or their decision-making committee to make the software decision easier and better, right? So I always like to, say, is this knockout content or is this closing content? And it's important to understand that, especially because your selling team will love this content, but I think it's really important to think about the customer experience as well. And then broaden the asset impact. We talked a lot about working with sales, but this is where you can echo this in enablement sessions. You can share this with analysts and earnings calls, PR responses, sales positioning guides. Throughout my 10-year experience, this is where CI can get fully embedded, right? And competitive enablement and competitive intelligence is so incredibly important to be able to be pulled out and pushed into these channels and to learn from these channels as well around how is your campaign doing, what is the market impact, and what is really the temperature for this. And these are all areas where you can not only be your testing ground, but also your end impact ground as well. And then lastly, think about follow-up to this campaign, right? If you're pushing something out into the market, really think about what is the internal journey of the people picking up the phone or responding to that email, right? Is there BDR, SDR training needed? What is the greater nurturing journey? And does this help close the prospect at the end of the day to become a customer and, most importantly, an advocate that you can use in future competitive campaigns? So that comes to the close of my session today. Just want to thank you so much for your engagement, your feedback, and your attention here. I wanted to close out with some additional resources that you can take and be inspired by in your next journey as you build out competitive marketing campaigns within your organization. So shamelessly, I had to put my own podcast. I do these conversations with industry leaders around how they've elevated competitive intelligence and competitive enablement from going from back office to the boardroom. So I really continue these conversations on the podcast. I have to give a really amazing shout out to Andy McConnor-Bicknell, who has an amazing podcast called Healthy Competition. And he goes into how does this play out across all industries and all different players. And then Jason Oakley and Federico Jorge goes into what does this look like in the wild, a deep dive into compared to what across all industries and sectors. So if you're looking for some inspiration, definitely would recommend these. If you have any additional suggestions, please feel free to put them in chat and the live chat afterwards as we can crowdsource some of the best resources together. So thank you so much for your time today. And I encourage you to jump into the live roundtable with me right after so we can continue the conversation. Thanks, everybody.